Welcome in, and thank you for joining us for another episode of Healthy, Wealthy, and Wise Retirement. Your host, Lauren Sherman, is a certified financial planner and owner of the flat fee firm Integrity Wealth Management. He curates each episode with you in mind. Whether a work-optional lifestyle is on the horizon or you're already there, this show has something for you. With that, listen in, and I hope you enjoy the show.
Hey everyone, welcome back for another Healthy, Wealthy, and Wise Retirement. I'm glad you're joining for this part 2 of my conversation with Jacob Schroeder, where we talk about FIRE, or Financially Independent Retire Early. So some of the topics we're going to cover today are how to access your funds prior to age 59 and a half, which can be an issue if you're following this FIRE strategy because you're going to tend to want to retire early potentially and not follow a traditional retirement path. So there's a couple of different ways we will discuss the rule of 55. We'll talk about something called SEPP 72T. And then we're going to move into some of the characteristics of people who really successfully implement a FIRE strategy. And finally, today, we're going to wrap up with a long list of things that you can do if you retire but you're bored. So it's a little bit of a funny concept to me but I think a lot of times we treat retirement like this end goal and you're racing to get there, especially if you don't really love your job and you get there and you think, okay, I made it. But in reality, that's just the beginning. It's a whole new chapter. I guess it's the beginning of a new chapter of retirement. So we're going to talk about that as well as what to do if you are bored. And you can find more from Jacob in the show notes. I'm going to link his work in there. You can also go back to part 1 and listen to the full review or full bio, I should say. So I think that's all I have for you today. I hope you enjoy part 2. And if you do have any ideas for either interviews or topics that you want to have covered, feel free to shoot me an email and we will do our best to cover those in future episodes. But for now, I hope you enjoy part 2 with Jacob Schroeder. So getting more specific on a couple of the strategies, one of the challenges for people that do go through this FIRE process and retire early is being able to have access to their funds. And often, during your working years, you're told to defer as much as you possibly can so that you don't have to pay taxes on it when you're in your higher tax bracket years. And then if that's the only avenue you're saving, though, there's that stipulation that you can't touch the funds until after age 59 and a half is where the IRS sets it. But you've written a couple of articles on this topic, and I'll link those in the show notes. The rule, so you have the SEPP 72T and then the rule of 55. So maybe tackle the rule of 55 first, because that one's pretty straightforward one. How can this be used to supplement a FIRE strategy of retiring early?
Yeah, like you said, I mean, the big challenge is when you get to that point is, okay, how do I get my money and not have to get penalized, because penalties can be pretty steep. It's about 10% tax penalty, early withdrawal tax penalty. And so the rule of 55 is kind of a helpful tool to kind of get around that. Certainly if you're choosing to retire in mid to late 50s, because essentially when you leave your job in the year you turn age 55 or later, you can then access, and this applies to, of course, an employer's plan like a 401k, 403b, but you can start taking that money out and you're not going to be subject to that early withdrawal penalty. I mean, of course, you're going to have to still pay ordinary income tax on the money you take out, of course.
But at least you're avoiding that penalty.
Yeah, exactly. And that works as a good bridge to then getting to age 59 and a half, when you can maybe then start accessing your IRAs, because this does not apply to an IRA. This is just that plan from your job. So it's something then you'd want to kind of plan around ahead of time, but it's a simple way to then get access to those accounts.
Okay, so that buys us 4.5 years from 59 and a half to 55. What about the SEP 72T?
Yeah, SEP 72T. I mean, it sounds kind of like a cyborg or something. I
Right.
mean, it's substantially equal periodic payments is
You
the,
got it.
it's a mouthful, but, basically what it is like a loophole in the IRS rules. I mean, you can access your money in an IRA or 401k before age 59 and a half without that penalty. But you have to commit to taking a certain amount every year for at least 5 years or until you hit age 59 and a half, whichever is longer. So
Right.
there's that strict stipulation, and it's certainly more rigid than the Rule 55. And once you start, you have to stick with that same withdrawal schedule. You
Right.
can't cancel it. You can't try to change the amount, because then you'd be subject to some penalties. I think there's like a 10% retroactive penalty and some potential interest charges. So if it's something that you want to pursue, then you really got to be mindful of that.
Yeah.
But
It's
still,
more, I was just going to say it's more rigid in one sense because you
mhm,
have to stick to it, but in the other sense, it does provide more flexibility from letting you retire earlier potentially. Because the 55
yeah,
rule, of course, is only working to age 55, after 55,
right.
where you could retire at age 40 and use this SEP 72T rule
Yeah, absolutely. I mean,
or any
this is
number.
this is a great way to kind of access that money. I mean, especially if a substantial amount socked away in your accounts. I mean, this is kind of a way to go. You just got to make sure that you establish that right amount and kind of plan it out to make sure that it works for you in that time period until you kind of can have that full access.
Right. So I think often I'll talk with people that they are trying to wait it out until age 59 and a half to retire. Or sometimes they try to wait it out until age 62 or even 65 because of Social Security
Hmm.
or Medicare. Um, so this is one way where we can have a little bit more flexibility and potentially retire earlier than 59 and a half if all of most of your assets are deferred, which for a lot of people that's the case.
Right.
Of course, we're still going to have that health insurance gap
Right.
between whatever age we retire and Medicare, but there are some solutions for that. So it's at least something that is worth a conversation for those people that do have the financial ability to retire, but maybe think that they have to wait it out for these IRS guidelines.
Yeah, absolutely. And you had mentioned that a lot of people leave the workforce out of health reasons, and
Hmm.
I think this applies to them as well. I mean, maybe they're not pursuing fire per se, but
Right.
in the case that they have some type of health issue or disability in which that maybe they cannot continue working, this lease gives them some access to the funds that they've saved away up to that point.
Right. And potentially with disability, if it's more of a total disability, they might have access to Medicaid where the
Yeah,
health insurance is not an issue either.
right.
So when people do successfully implement the fire strategy, do you see common trends or characteristics amongst this group? Um, I guess I have a couple ideas. I don't want to lead you, but maybe I'll throw those in as well. But I'm curious, just seeing that from your own perspective.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, certainly from the characteristic side of it, discipline for sure. I mean,
Hmm.
it takes a lot to be vigilant with every purchase and trying to save
Right.
nearly every dollar. I think if you really kind of broke down the demographics of the fire movement, you might find a greater share of people that are in that high income area, especially those in their 20s and 30s with those dreams of really retiring early. You get a lot of people that are kind of in high skilled professions and are making a lot of money. But there are a lot of people too uh, that just reach the point of having massive amounts of debt, and they just realize I don't want to live like this anymore. I'm going to commit to a better way, and they're a big section of the FAIR movement as well. So you do kind of vary the financial demographics, But I would say too, I mean, it's just for characteristics. I mean, fire followers are very intentional with their money. I mean, they're willing to make those trade-offs we discussed earlier, whether it's having a smaller house, driving an older car, those type of things. Um, they're more than willing to kind of have a higher goal behind every financial
Right.
decision.
I think that intentionality is a good word that would probably be a defining characteristic of the group.
Yeah, I think so as well, and that applies too as to how they generate income, because there's a decent amount of them as well that, I mean, they have a full-time job, but they're very likely also to pursue those side hustles, whether
Sure.
that's freelance work or starting a business or trying to find some type of passive income stream, whether it's owning a vending machine or something like that. Just
Right.
these creative ways to kind of generate a little bit more income. And that pertains, I think, a big trait of the FIRE community, which is we had talked about a little bit, is that high financial literacy.
Right.
At the very least, if they're not super savvy about money, they are very, very curious. I mean, they are actively reading books, reading blogs. They're the type of people that love spreadsheets in some sense, constantly learning and experimenting and discussing things about money. So they're very open about that, which is very different from the general population. You have a lot of people that still see money as taboo, but certainly not those who achieve FIRE. They get excited discussing money.
Right. And the ones that kind of implement the strategy most successfully, would you say, I think I read in one of your articles about how they retire to something, and it's not just a retire from their work, if I remember right.
Yeah, absolutely. And that certainly pertains to kind of the psychological side, is that, I mean, they do have a goal of which are actually, it's not just financial, it's actually something that's life oriented. And those are the people that are then most excited to get there. They're the happiest and most likely to stick to it, because there is something that it's bigger to what they're doing right now in the future. So it's not all financial related, and that kind of
Right.
pertains to like another unique thing about the FIRE movement is that it's not always just about personal enrichment. There's kind of often among people in the community there's ulterior motives and almost like an underlying philosophy that kind of it's about challenging consumer culture and traditional work norms.
Mm.
Where people will choose to live a minimalist lifestyle, not necessarily just to save money, but to just kind of get out of the rat race of
Sure.
consumer culture, not to be a mindless consumer, and to reduce their environmental footprint. It can also be kind of portrayed as a form of resistance to the idea that you should live to work rather than work to live, that type of thing. So
Right.
yeah, there's a lot that goes into it that's a little bit beyond money, and I think the people that then kind of can reach that level of freedom to kind of do the things that they want to do and actually know what they want to do end up being the happiest to kind of reach that level.
Right. Right. Yeah, I'll share a couple of personal. So my wife and I wouldn't say we're necessarily in like the fire movement per se, but
Sure.
a couple of ways where we've tried to be kind of circling back to that word intentional. Be intentional with our money is find things that we really enjoy, like food and coffee, and just taking those two alone. One way you could experience those would be, and it's not necessarily right or wrong, but it's just where you want to allocate your dollars. One would be going to the coffee shop every day and spending
Hmm.
time there. You could do that if you enjoy coffee. Or if you make it at home, you could get a really good coffee maker and you could even buy the highest end coffee. And maybe you find that you get the same level of enjoyment from making it yourself, or maybe even there's a little bit
Right.
more because you're doing it yourself. And even if you're buying kind of the top tier stuff, you might be at a fraction of a cost of buying it for someone that's going to make it for you. Same way with food. If you really, really get into food, you can almost teach yourself to enjoy the experience of creating it too, and creating a meal. And even when you're buying really high end products from the grocery store, it's still going to probably cost a fraction of what it would if you were going out to eat. So those are just a couple examples we've found, but I think that finding it's back to your point of saying it doesn't mean you have to sacrifice things that you really enjoy. It just might mean finding a different way to enjoy them.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's a big part of it as well in the fire movement is to really concentrate on life experiences and because that again is kind of is isn't that what all this money is for to begin with is to
Right.
accumulate life experiences. I mean you're going to retire not only on your money but you're going to retire with your memories here. Those things mean a lot. So I don't think you necessarily have to sacrifice life experiences like that. You can adapt them, and sometimes they could be more fruitful than
Right.
instead of dropping $200 on a meal with at a five-star restaurant. Maybe you would actually have more of a memorable experience if you you made some really complex gourmet meal at home, and certainly, and you're building a skill, and you're you're having an experience with your spouse or your friends, things like that. Those
True.
things are going to make a long-term difference than so much of just spending a lot.
Right. Right. Well, so now let's fast forward and say that we followed the fire strategy and we retired early. We're going to jump ahead to another article you wrote titled Things to Do When You're Retired and Bored. I thought that
Hmm.
was a funny one because so often people are, retirement, that's the big kind of end goal. That's the finish line. So it's funny to read. Now you're retired. What if you're bored? Um, you had a list of 13 different suggestions for retirees who find themselves with, I guess, more time on their hands than they know what to do with.
Hmm.
And I'm going to list off a few, or maybe I'll just read through this list real quick,
Sure.
and then we can kind of stop on any that you would like. But I'll read the full list first. So we have learn a new language, join a sports league, such as a pickleball league, nurture a hobby, make good art, work on a business plan, search for a fun part time job, dip your toes into volunteering, get an education, learn to operate a motorcycle, RV, or sailboat. That could be a fun one.
Yeah.
Head outdoors, consider a run for local office. In my mind, that one's crossed off the list.
Yeah, these days maybe.
Adopt a pet, or plan to not retire but simply scale back at work. I think that's the full list of any that really jump out to you that you want to spend a minute on.
Well, I just want to say, I mean, one of the most surprising things that I've found writing about retirement and speaking to people, both just retirees and people in the financial industry, is the fact that, yeah, the surprising number of people do get to this stage in life and are bored. I mean, there's been numerous studies that show that it can be a problem. Certainly, that pertains to what we're discussing in regards to retiring to something. So it's important to not only have maybe a list of things that you enjoy doing now, but also having a list of things that you might be open to doing in the future. Because, I mean, it's certainly if you love golf, nothing wrong with spending your golden years playing golf, but eventually you might get bored doing that after a while. So you
Yeah.
should be open to experiencing new things.
I can
And
see how that's a problem too, because so many people who are really good in their careers, they're kind of a little bit tunnel vision of like
mhm.
that's what they're really good at, and they don't really necessarily give themselves time for a lot elsewhere. But then you get to retirement, and you have all that time.
Yeah, identity loss can be a
Right.
main problem. Certainly, if you really kind of having a strong attachment to your profession, certainly I think a lot of people in certain fields, I mean, like a doctor or something like that, when you're used to having that kind of status of being a doctor and having your community perceive you as, this key part of the community, and then all of a sudden you're done with it. Now what? So that's where it comes in, where you need to kind of be willing to adapt and pivot to try new things to kind of build up that identity, or at least to just kind of utilize your time. And the things about everything on that list is a lot of them kind of work simultaneously as to giving you a sense of purpose, but they also provide a lot of physical and mental benefits that can help you later in life, and just to kind of eventually altogether lead to a high sense of life satisfaction. But it's interesting, some of the things. I mean, the one thing I'd like to point out is on that list is owning a pet. I was kind of stunned to read some surveys that showed a lot of people, when they look at retirement, what most gives them most purpose isn't always necessarily spending time with family and friends or volunteering. It's just having a dog or a cat.
Oh, that's funny.
Because I guess that's, not only do you have that companionship, but also you have that sense of responsibility. You're taking care of something else in your life, so you have that additional sense of meaning. But a lot of those things on that list are supposed to pertain to that. They give you that meaning, but also the health benefits along with it. Maybe not so much running for office. I mean, that certainly can give you a sense of purpose and meaning if you're up to the task. But
Might give you gray hair as well.
yeah, it's certainly a different level of responsibility there.
I usually have, well, I don't have, double checking, I don't have any dogs in the office right now, but we have 3 at the house. So, yeah, I definitely get the pet, and I do get out on a lot of walks with them. So that, I guess from a exercise standpoint, that can help. One other thing I wanted to note with the kind of specific to the FIRE movement of when you said scaling back at work, if you have maybe multiple revenues, streams of revenue, or if you have a job that's flexible where you can maybe cut back or retire and then go back if you wanted to, that could be huge. But it can also, from a financial standpoint, when we run the numbers, one of the biggest risks for people as they retire that's completely outside of their control is what the market's doing at that time, and maybe the first few years before they retire and the next few years after they retire. A lot of people remember the commercials about the retirement red zone, or I guess more formally you'd call it sequence of returns risk. And if you are a FIRE retiree and you have a long life ahead of you, so your portfolio has even more years that it's going to be responsible for funding your retirement, that becomes pretty important. So having the ability to maybe have a little flexibility of going back if you need to could be, I know not everybody would have that ability. If you're leaving a corporate job, once you say adios, you might not have the ability to go back. But that was just something that popped in my head when I read that last one of scaling back at work.
Yeah, definitely. And I think, a traditional retiree may have the flexibility to maybe adjust that withdrawal rate. But if you're already at a pretty kind of low withdrawal rate to try to sustain you for a long period of time, that might be even more challenging. So I do think that is something to really consider. And maybe it doesn't get as much coverage as it should within the FIRE community, which is to try to build up some skills in which that might be applicable across a variety of fields. So you might work in finance, or you might work in marketing or something like that, but maybe your role within those fields, maybe it could apply to different fields in which you could then be a consultant or things like that. I mean, the challenge is that a lot of stuff is easier said than done. I mean, certainly if you were able to get some type of passive income stream, which a lot of people aspire to do, not realizing that there can be a lot of responsibilities. I mean, a lot of people think, well, I'm going to buy some real estate, or I'm going to buy an apartment building and I'll just collect the rent. Well, you then have all the maintenance issues and trying to make sure you get the right tenants in there. I mean, that could then become a whole lot of work on top of it. So, but I do think it's got to be a key consideration for this, of making sure that you do have some of those options and skills in which maybe worst comes to worst, you can then, for the time being, kind of stem the bleeding if you then kind of run into some big trouble, big market downturn as you get started. Something to kind of hold you off for the time.
Right. Well, hey, that's probably a good thing, a good point to wrap this up for today. But Jacob, I really appreciate it. Well, first off, for you sharing your content and all the articles that you research and that you write, and that I feel like the stuff you write about really hits home with our audience. So I really appreciate that, first off, because you're putting out a lot of great stuff out there. And then, of course, secondly, I want to thank you for coming back and being a repeat visitor to the show for the second time here. So,
well, it's been a pleasure. Thank you so much for having me. I mean, this has been a fun conversation.
Yeah, we're going to continue to share your articles and share your work. And I really enjoy what you do, because it's the type of stuff that you can read, and then instead of just taking a lot of times I'll read something and I'm trying to find one or two or three nuggets to grab out of it. And what I've found when I read your stuff is that it's not necessarily grabbing things out, which there's some of that, but it's also getting me, it triggers more questions. So it kind of helps me to, I've never thought about that, and let me just put things in a different perspective. So I really appreciate your writing style and the topics that you're researching.
Oh, I appreciate that. Thank you for the kind words. And I think that's ultimately the goal of writing, is to try to get people to think, and not necessarily to provide information. It's to get people to kind of ask questions about themselves and about where they are and where they want to be in the future. So it's enjoyable. And I mean, certainly you're doing this with this podcast, so that's why it's a privilege to be a part of it.
Yeah. Well, you're hitting home with your articles, and hey, these podcast episodes are easy for me. I don't have to do all the work. I just get to schedule it and then have you do the work. So I appreciate that. And then, for all of our listeners, you can find all of our past episodes by checking out the podcast tab at integrityguidance.com. And then I'm going to try my best to get back in the routine of having an episode come out every 2 weeks. So be sure to check those out as they come. And until then, God bless.
God bless. Thank you.
Thank you for listening in and supporting this show. And if you have a moment, we'd love a 5-star review to help this podcast reach even more listeners. Also, this show thrives on feedback from its audience. So if you have any topics you'd like to hear covered, or have anyone specific you'd like to see join the show, please email your recommendations to our address, hello@integrityguidance.com. That's hello@integrityguidance.com. We review every email that comes in, and we will do our best to include any recommendations you have for us. Thanks again, and be sure to follow our show so you don't miss an episode. This podcast is for entertainment and informational purposes only and is not intended as specific tax, legal, or investment advice. Lauren Sherman is a certified financial planner and owner of Integrity Wealth Management, a flat fee firm which serves pre-retirees and retirees in search of their own work optional lifestyle.